Hello, and welcome to Field Lab Earth, the podcast that's all about past and present advances in the fields of agronomic, crop, soil, and environmental sciences. Today, we'll be talking to Dr. Olga Walsh. Nitrogen management is an ongoing issue for farmers who want to grow productive crops without damaging the environment. Precision agriculture and remote sensing tools like unmanned aerial vehicles or UAVs can help farmers on this quest, but researchers must first confirm the accuracy of these tools and confirm when and how best to apply them. This episode, Olga joins us to discuss different measuring tools, their efficacy, and how they can help farmers manage nitrogen well. I'm your host, Abby Morrison. Let's talk about science. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today we have Dr. Olga Walsh with us. Olga is an associate professor in grain crops and research and extension at the School of Plant and Environmental Sciences, College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University in Blacksburg, Virginia. She received her bachelor's degree in soil science at St. Petersburg State University in St. Petersburg, Russia, and her master's and PhD also in soil science at the Oklahoma State University in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Her Virginia Tech appointment is split between extension 70% and research 30% in grain crops. The focus is on production and management of corn, small grains, and other potential crops for grain and silage. This work is important for increasing overall productivity, resiliency, sustainability, and economic value of food, agriculture production systems, and for conserving our natural resources. Olga works closely with Virginia Cooperative Extension agents, the Agriculture Research Extension Centers, and stakeholder groups such as the Virginia Grain Producers Association. Her expertise is in soil fertility, plant nutrition, remote sensing, and precision agriculture. Hello, Olga. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hi, Abby. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk.
Wonderful. Yeah, we are so excited to have you on. So today we're going to be talking about some things to do with nitrogen management in wheat. So if you could start us off by just telling us about the issue that you were looking to research and some of the goals you had for your project, that would be awesome.
Yes, sure. I'm really excited to speak about this because it's something I've been working on for many years now. And the reason why this work is important, a lot of people don't realize that 50% of all the food produced in the world cannot have been produced now without using fertilizers. So commercial fertilizers that farmers are using, enabling them to, allowing them to produce enough food crops for increasing population. And the thing is that nitrogen is one of those nutrients and chemical elements that plants need to survive in larger quantities, and it's very important in terms of increasing yield overall. But however, no matter what efforts growers and plant breeders and agronomists and scientists throughout the world trying to work on increasing the use of or the efficiency of fertilizer use, especially nitrogen, is still about only 35% or so. And that is in different crops, such as wheat, for example, the crop that we worked here. So, managing nitrogen is very difficult because it's very, very mobile in plants and in soil. So it could transform so easily depending on environment and can be lost very easily as well from the soils and from plants. So all of us who work in this area, we're trying to understand, what processes affect these movements and changes of nitrogen and how to maintain crop yields with still being able to not wasting resources such as fertilizer and irrigation water. And so we are a lot of times trying to involve some sort of precision nutrient management plan that most growers are familiar with, and that really helps us to guide those fertilizer application. And the thing is that the main two components of this precise nutrient management is we need to know how much soil already has in different nitrogen compounds, and also how much fertilizer is required to add And so, of course, for knowing how much soil can provide, we can just do a soil test and collect soil samples and analyze it. And then here we go. We have the value of nitrogen that already is present in the soil for plants to take up. However, most of the time than not, that amount is not enough for crop to make it till the end of the season, especially producing also good quality, not just yield. And so for that, we need to know how much nitrogen to add, right? And in those cases, the precision agriculture has several ways for us, or several tools that growers and scientists are using. So I would like to just first define some of those things that we're going to be talking about later. So we're kind of all on the same page what I'm discussing. So first of all, precision agriculture, probably most of you heard about it. Really, it is just a modern way of doing agriculture and farming. And basically it started with the idea that it may be useful to change the way we manage crops and soils and water and chemicals according to differences that we see in the field. So, for example, landscape in the field could be different. We could have different soil types. And basically that affects how the same crop would grow in different parts of the field. So a good example is, for example, depending on the amount of rainfall in the same field, we have maybe a higher area or a bottom of the field. So the hills and the tops will perform differently because we'll have different moisture available, even though we, provide everything else the same. So the remote sensing I'm going to talk about is literally meaning sensing from a distance. And so sensors, they use these optical characteristics of plants, which are very unique for different plants and a lot of times even different varieties. And that can help measure how healthy those plants are. Because plants really appear green mostly because they contain chlorophyll. And, we know that this green, it's basically this green pigment, and it tends to absorb red and blue light because it's something that plants can extract a lot of energy for growth. And also it tends to reflect green light and near-infrared light. So just detecting those differences is very helpful for us to identify or measure plant health. And then really the three main precision sensing advantages is, sensors they're much more reliable and objective compared to just our visual examination of a crop. And they provide the values, which are numerical values. So that way, the data that we get, with sensors is not just descriptive. It provides actual numbers, and that way we can be much more precise at measuring it. And also, of course, sensors use and can be functioning in regions of light that our eyes are not able to function. So that's important. And of course, different types of sensors can also be designed to produce values that can be used then for estimating crop yield, because we've known for a long time that, working together with different groups of people always makes us more successful. So in this case, there was a close collaboration with engineering and agronomists, plant scientists, because they were trying to develop a sensor that would tell us the most about our crops. And so the engineering group was asking, what do scientists need to know to predict yield? And agronomists answered that we need to know the amount of biomass that plants produced from the time they were planted. And that's how the first sensors were developed. And literally one of the sensors is called green seeker because it literally detects the difference between the greenness of the plants, in contrast with surrounding soil. And of course, drones can also be used. So drones are the UAVs. So we could either have something on the ground as a handheld sensor, or we can put the same sensor or camera on a drone. So that's the type of research that we're doing.
Sure. And you had 3 main goals specific to this project. Can you tell me about those?
Yes. First of all, we wanted to really test and confirm our previous findings that wheat yield, which is basically the amount of grain produced, and then grain quality, which is one of the most important quality parameters, like number one that growers would be interested in, is the grain protein content, which is highly correlated with the amount of nitrogen. So all of this is tied with nitrogen uptake. That's why we talk a lot here about nitrogen. And the second one, again, I mentioned earlier, we have handheld sensors that are literally the size of a cell phone. You can use it on the ground. And then, of course, the sensor-equipped drones that we fly over fields, and they collect similar information. So we wanted to see whether one or the other method would be more efficient. And we also looked at trying to understand or pinpoint the better timing at which or growth stage of the plants at which sensing would be most effective for us to estimate yield. So, of course, it's important if both sensors can produce similar information with similar accuracy, it gives growers so many more options depending on their objectives or where the fields are located and things like that. So that's why we're doing this work. And then another part of it was there's a lot of discussions always going on about whether different varieties of wheat or corn or anything that grows are growing, whether those varieties need to be treated differently. And a lot of times they are, and a lot of times nutrient management is done like by class of wheat or by class of several different crops. But in this case, we just wanted to see whether the data that we obtain with drones and handheld sensors would be different for different varieties of wheat. So one of the most frequently asked questions by growers is how should they manage nitrogen fertilizer depending on what variety they choose to grow. So, for example, the hard wheat cultivars have a higher protein in general and gluten. And then, especially, more than the soft wheats. And then the soft white spring wheat, for example, its flour is more suitable for whiter products like cakes, pastries, and things like that. And so that's the reason why the field trials were funded by the Idaho Wheat Commission. And this work was conducted it was done at 5 locations in southern Idaho for these 2 years. And basically the experimental fields were in Treasure Valley and Magic Valley, which is the major crop production area. And this is along the Snake River in Idaho. And so we used the soft white spring wheat and the hard red spring wheat, which we contrasted in this study.
So what is the difference between a class and a variety in this context?
Yes, so the difference between classes and varieties. So classes is basically a classification of wheat depending on their characteristics and the product, because different types of or different classes of wheat are grown for different purposes. For example, for pizza dough or for cookies or for different noodles, they need different qualities. And that includes also protein value, which we were looking at in this trial. And then varieties, so there could be several varieties developed by different groups, different breeders, based on specific needs of a region or even more niche product that they're trying to achieve, like, for example, specific Asian noodles. And in that case, the wheat is of a certain type or it's a certain class of wheat, but it also has several different varieties of that class wheat that can be grown in different parts of the world, for example, or even different parts of the state, because they are adopted better.
Okay, that's kind of what I assumed was the case. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to be using these terms incorrectly later on in the interview. So, what did you do? What were your methods as you were trying to look into these questions?
Yeah, so basically, since we are basing our yield prediction or estimation, which we are doing in season or, during actively growing crop, but we're trying to predict yield that would be measured at harvest. We need to do several things. And since we already know that yield is usually highly related to the amount of biomass. So we're doing different methods or we're testing different methods of detecting this biomass and measuring it, as well as measuring the amount of greenness of that biomass. So that are kind of components of productive system, because growers are not just striving to get the highest yield, they're also targeting specific quality for different end users again. So for example, it's one of the most frequent questions that the growers are asking is how should they manage nitrogen or different inputs for different varieties they grow. So, for example, the hard red wheats, they would be high in grain protein. And then some other varieties like a soft white wheat, they typically have different types of end uses. So the grain is not as high in protein. And it's difficult because a lot of times growers use different types of varieties. So that's why we included different classes of varieties of wheat here. And basically, we estimated biomass. We scanned the crop at 2 different times throughout the season. And the 2 times were picked not just at random, but for specific reason. We chose 2 growth stages, which is tillering and tillering growth stage, where the plants are very actively growing, producing tillers, which end up typically, if managed right, with a head filled with grain. So that's why, tillering is very important. Also, it making sure that all the leaves are producing at the normal rate, and they're able to capture nutrients, and also it ensures that we have a nice developed root system. So that's the tillering stage. So at that time, usually previous research showed that it's a better time to scan the crop for yield prediction. And it's also important to note that at that time, growers are able to fertilize their crop without significant loss of yield. So basically, tillering is for yield prediction, because let's say they wouldn't be able to predict yield accurately, but they can't do anything about it to improve yield. But in this case, that's the perfect time to fertilize. So that is why it's important to scan the crop at that time, right? And then the second time or growth stage was flowering. And this is why, although many trials showed completely opposite effect, but there's also many trials that show that if growers apply nitrogen at time of flowering, although we very rarely see a yield increase from that, but the quality usually improves. And again, since we're looking at grain protein content, maybe addition of nitrogen later in the season can help to boost protein. For some varieties, it's important. So we've collected the same data with a drone, to which we had an attached camera, and then we also used this green seeker sensor that was used, as a handheld unit on the ground. And then we related that information with the harvested yield and grain protein values for all of these varieties that we did. And so that was a very fun project. There was a lot of data to collect, but that's always fun because you can look at it later on and find interesting things.
Yeah.
That maybe you haven't noticed before.
Sure. Yeah, having lots of data is great. Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the show. Interested in learning more? Olga's paper, Wheat Yield and Protein Estimation with Handheld and UAV-based reflectance measurements, published in AgroSystems Geosciences and Environment, is always freely available. If you are a certified crop advisor or certified professional soil scientist, you can take a quiz for continuing education units for this episode, which can be found in our show notes or on certifiedcropadvisor.org. Let's get back to the show. So, after you had done your testing with your drone and your green seeker to kind of estimate these things and were able to correlate those with or match them up with the results that you had at the end, what did you find? What were your results?
Yeah, actually, it was a nice project where we were able to collect really nice quality data. It was precisely done at the right date, at the right growth stage, because we're dealing with systems that are sometimes affected by nature, and there's not much we can do. But in this case, we didn't have much of a disturbance, so the data was pretty nice. And so, really, what we found that both drone data and data that we collected on the ground really had a very strong relationship, meaning that their data were very comparable with each other. And so again, that means that you could use both tools. Either you want to fly a drone to collect the reflectance from the crop, or you can use this little green handheld sensor. And the data would basically give you similar, very comparable data that you can use then to guide fertilization. So you can decide whether your crop needs nitrogen or whether it doesn't, and how much. So that is the hope. So that's what we found, that basically the two methods were similar at both growth stages. We also found that indeed we could accurately estimate yield with both methods. And we found that yield was much more precisely accurately predicted, but the grain protein part is still a challenge, and I think is also going to be a lot of work done in the future on that, because definitely, since remote sensing is really developing incredibly fast, especially with new technologies like AI and machine learning. So this is basically the future. It's just that we don't know all the components yet. We don't know, plant physiology is so complex and soils are so complex, and we're dealing with continuously changing and growing environment. You're then going to a warmer climate with more extreme events. So we're really trying to look forward while still making growers profitable right now. So it's, agronomy is a challenging profession, but it's really fun. So what we found is that it's a good method for definitely for predicting yield, and depending on the grower's preference, probably much easier to use a handheld sensor. However, if your field is really large, or you have several fields to compare, and you don't have much resources for, just sending out a large group of people to scan your field, you could just choose to use a drone. However, data might be a little bit more complicated to not so much interpret, because interpretation is similar, but to get to the data of similar format is more difficult using the drone for sure, since the handheld unit is basically already providing you data that you need to use right away. And but it's preference. I know a lot of growers are very interested in drones and they are proficient at flying them. So it's just really a preference. And another thing that we found, that although we did not see any significant differences in how data showed up for these different wheat classes that we evaluated, there was still differences that we were able to pick up. So, part of my job, which is very important part of this position with Virginia Tech, is actually variety evaluation across the state. And I'm thinking that if we can improve or expand variety trials where we can use the same plots, or maybe plots that grow near it, but just collect more detailed information and remote sensing be employed there, maybe that would really speed up the process of knowing how all these different varieties respond to nitrogen. And maybe in the future we will be able to also predict quality just as accurate, because in other crops it actually did happen, and we were able to predict in sugar beets both yield and sugar content very accurately, which was very surprising. So there's hope definitely for wheat crop, which is very important.
Yeah, I'm glad that your answers have actually answered two of my other questions, which were, how easily farmers can potentially get into the drone side of things, which seems like they're already doing it, which is awesome. And you've mentioned that they can add fertilizer mid-season, which was another one of my questions, is, when can they do anything about it? But I'm curious, so it seems like there's, with the biomass, you might be able to kind of easily see if the plants are struggling and be able to tell that you need to add more fertilizer. But since the grain yield or the protein content in the grain isn't really something that you have until there's grain there, I mean, are there any other tests that they can do to know if the protein content is in a place of struggle, or do they kind of just have to, at this stage of where the research is, do they just kind of have to wait, or potentially add more at that flowering stage and hope that fixes it, I guess?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. Actually, every time we always debate about this at meetings, and definitely at grower meetings. The thing is that the more work of this type we do, the more information we gather. And this work is going on regionally, locally, and as well as across the world. So we really working now as a Society of Agronomy, Crop Science Society and Soil Society, to really open up the data into an open database. That way we can share with each other. And a lot of times we're not aware of other similar projects that collect very similar data. So, the more data we have, the more high quality data we have, we will eventually have much more power here, kind of as a society of scientists. But also, on the other hand, I think there's other methods that growers definitely can use, or crop advisors can use. And regionally, for different crops like wheat and corn, if you look at local universities, the state universities and extension offices, a lot of times they have done work at their level for their local growers, where they can, maybe they developed a tissue test, like a leaf samples that somebody take for you, or a growers can take themselves, and then use that to, look at protein. And then in some cases, as new varieties are being developed, a lot of times companies that produce the variety, they work closely with growers and with the university to really highly and widely kind of evaluate that specific variety for that region. And then that way they can develop pretty good, reliable guidelines for that specific variety as well. Like if it can address some specific issue of like really high lodging or some pest that is now going to be, treated for that specific variety, let's say, then they can really work harder specifically for that. And yeah, definitely those resources exist, and a lot of states in different groups are working on digitizing those. So there's more and more information that will be available online for growers and crop advisors, hopefully in the future.
Awesome. That's very encouraging. I like that a lot.
Yes.
So then that transitions super easily into my next question, which is, where's the future research on these topics headed?
Yes, I think, again, looking at different varieties and how they respond to different agriculture inputs, depending on growing environment, it's something that needs to be looked at. And also, I think working closely with different groups, let's say breeders, working closely with agronomists or soil scientists and modelers can, have a very kind of multitasking and overreaching project that could help answer several different questions at the same time. Yeah, and I think involving growers in this kind of work is very important too, because a lot of times growers have very detailed notes about their specific environment or their specific soil. And, that would be very helpful, not only just from the point of view of using land to test something, but also just to gain that access to data, hopefully, to kind of collaborate with growers more on that.
Sure.
Yeah, and of course, there should be more work on developing more kind of systems that growers could use easily without extensive training or, a lot of hours of sitting in seminars, and something that would be straightforward to use for anyone, and still produced good enough data, because our data is as good as it gets, but this is natural environment, these are plants, soil, so we're not dealing with very precise, strict matters like algebra. So this is really as good as it could get. Sometimes it's much better than just doing nothing. And, being perfectionist is not always helpful in this profession. So as long as we have meaningful results for growers that they can really benefit, I think that would be much more productive than thinking about something really perfect,
Sure.
Yeah. Small steps, a lot of times small steps, and then that kind of helps overall.
Yeah, that's true in so many areas of life, not just research.
For sure.
Very wise.
Yeah, for sure.
So then I have 3 questions left for you. This has been a wonderful conversation so far. The first one is, where can listeners learn more about the things that we've talked about today?
No, first of all, depending on where they're located, I would really encourage just reach out to their local state university and extension offices. And they could also look up, there's a lot of information online at the USDA website, which is the Department of Agriculture office, as well as the NRCS, which is National Resource Conservation Service, or even reach out to state agronomists or local crop advisors. And all of these people will have a lot of expertise from different points of view, and they've done either research or a lot of work with growers, and they would know a lot of things to at least start the conversation. And then also, there's a lot of resources online, which pretty much any university extension. So there's a lot of bulletins and different reports that you can find online specific on wheat or remote sensing or nitrogen. So yeah, just look it up, and a lot of stuff is available online for you.
Awesome. That is great advice. So then the next question is, if listeners then want to take that next step and get involved in this research or issue, how can they do that?
Yeah, probably first looking at specific things that their local offices provide. A lot of times if you reach out to your extension specialists or extension agents, they're called differently in different states, or extension educators, a lot of times they have programs already set up or planned for the future, learning, for example, about soil health or learning about specific crop management. And, in many universities, these are targeted for different types of audiences, and a lot of times they're also offered online. So that is very convenient for somebody who can, just learn at their own pace. And in general, that, most universities also have access to wonderful book collections. And basically any researcher that I know would be always happy to chat about any of this, because we all love when people love our work and they have interests in something that we also enjoy. So yeah, just pick up the phone or visit your local agronomist.
Sure. Yeah, we'll have links to a lot of resources that have been mentioned and your contact information so that they can get a hold of you to talk about this kind of thing. So, final question then is, what is one fun fact that listeners wouldn't know about you if all they had was your research?
No, if I have to pick one, I have a 15-year-old Chihuahua, and his name is Pickle.
Oh my gosh!
And he's super cute, and he is one of the babies of the family,
Aww.
as they always are.
Oh, I'm sure.
And he was a rescue, so he just adorable.
Aw. Well, good on you for getting a rescue. Wow, what an old little gentleman at this stage.
Yes.
Lovely.
Yes.
Pickle. What a good dog name. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation talking about something that is really important to a lot of people. So thank you so much for your time and for being on the show.
Yes, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this as well. And I hope listeners got to know something that they didn't know before, and would be sparking some interest and going to learn more about these things. Yeah, thank you so much.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Student Spotlight, where we highlight the work of graduate and undergraduate society student members. Today, we'll be talking to Ayush. Welcome to the show. Can you start us off by introducing yourself and where you're studying?
Yeah, thank you for having me here. I'm Ayush Kachulal Sharma, a PhD candidate in Soil, Water, and Ecosystem Sciences Department, University of Florida, Gainesville.
Awesome. And what are you currently researching?
My work focuses on nutrient recommendation for the potatoes, especially sulfur nutrient. Also, I work with UAV-based hyperspectral imaging for high throughput phenotyping.
Great. And if you could have your dream research project, what would that be?
So I would like to develop a model that can estimate canopy nutrient concentrations in a real time by using airborne or the spaceborne hyperspectral imaging.
Awesome. Well, if you would like to get in touch with Ayush about his work, we'll have his contact information in our show notes. Thank you so much for being on the show today, and best wishes on your future studies and career. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Field Lab Earth. More information can be found in the description below. Thank you.